What's worse than an ad interrupting your favorite music or podcast? That uninspired coffee you've been drinking while working, which is why Flavia is elevating your everyday coffee experience. Now you can enjoy cafe-quality beverages like coffee, tea, frothy lattes, and creamy hot chocolate made right in your home office, actual office, or wherever you want to upgrade your mug with bold, delicious flavors. Visit Flavia.com to shop the collection of machines and beverages now.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
And welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. Former Marine Daniel Penny has now been charged with manslaughter by DA Alvin Bragg for the death of an aggressive homeless man, Jordan Neely, on a New York City subway. And joining us now to talk about this case, which is gripping the nation, is former NYPD Detective Angel Maysonet. Angel, great to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rita.
What is your reaction, first off, when you heard the news of the death of Jordan Neely and what happened in this case?
Well, I mean, it was obviously a tragedy that could have been avoided. It was definitely unfortunate that he lost his life. I certainly don't think he deserved to die. I do think that there were a lot of contributing factors to this death, right? Not many people are speaking about the almost $1 billion that Mayor de Blasio and his wife had and misappropriated, I guess, in my air quotes, or basically lost, that was allotted for Thrive New York City, which was money that was going to go to help people just like Jordan Neely, right? We're going to help mentally ill individuals, homeless individuals on the subways and in the streets, etc. Maybe if that money was used properly, maybe he could have gotten the, care that he needed, and this may have been avoided.
What do you think also of his criminal history? Because obviously there was mental illness. Often they go hand in hand.
Yes, it's a good point, right? I mean, if we're going to bring up his mental history, we can't avoid bringing up his criminal history. I mean, we certainly don't want to disparage someone in death, but it has to be considered, right? He was a violent individual. He had broke the orbital bone of a woman in her late 60s on the subway. There are videos circulating of him having confrontations with passengers in the past. Apparently, he was being violent and aggressive that day, or threatening to be violent, and he was being aggressive that day. He had over 40 arrests. Those things cannot be overlooked, right? He had many run-ins with the police. He should not have been on the street. He was in Rikers Island, I believe, for the assault, and he did a year for a serious assault, for an assault second degree, I believe it was, and he should have been in prison to that point.
How often does this happen also where there are folks with mental illness, the revolving door, just as you talked about? Even Mayor Eric Adams has talked about getting some of these folks voluntarily or involuntarily locked up.
Well, I think I've said it before on your podcast. A lot of these individuals enjoy being homeless, right? I say enjoy, and people sometimes take offense to that, but they do. A lot of them want to be on the street, whether they're mentally ill or they're not. They enjoy the freedom, quote unquote, of being homeless and not having any real ties to, normal, quote unquote, life. And oftentimes getting them to involuntarily go to get treatment is a real arduous task. I mean, it's a real, a lot of times they're drug users, right? And they have needles or things of that nature. And, the police are always put as the front line to everything. So now you're going to put the police into, grabbing these folks and possibly getting pricked with a needle. There's communicable diseases that come along with that. There's all sorts of different variables. At the end of the day, if people don't want to get treatment and they're not harming themselves or anyone else and they're just in the street, it's a hard thing to just make them go into a hospital to get treatment or, make them get shelter.
What kind of a role also do families have? Because so many times families, I think, don't do enough. I'm sure it's also difficult for families who keep trying with individuals with mental illness. But from your experience, too, how important is families doing the right thing by the individual and also by society?
Well, yeah, obviously, definitely the involvement or lack of involvement by a lot of families is apparent. I mean, I experienced it when I was a police officer. I was a patrol cop for 12 years before I became a detective. And there were lots of times where the family was nowhere to be found unless, something tragic happened or unfortunately, and obviously this is not the case every time, there was something that they could profit off of, right? Something like this happens right away. The ambulance chasers, so to speak, come out of the woodwork. The Al Sharptons of the world and people like that come out of the woodwork, and now they want to sue, and all of a sudden the family, jumps out from under whatever rock they were hiding, and not trying to be too offensive, but they come out from wherever they were hiding, and all of a sudden they pretend or they claim that they were trying to get this individual help, or they were trying to get them some services because it behooves them, right? Because there's kind of that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and it's I don't want to sound like I have no empathy referring to it that way, but a lot of times that's just the facts. A lot of times these people, they do owe it to society and to the person who is going through these changes to get them help, to try to get them committed. And a lot of times they don't do it.
How tough is it also often if you have a family with member with mental illness? Because there are, on the flip side, families, and I don't know the full details, of course, in the Neely case, but, we sit and hear about also people who've tried. It's very difficult also, isn't it, when you have someone, a sibling or a son or daughter with mental illness? Yes,
definitely. I mean, I have people who are very close to me. I have a young man who's very, very close to me. I grew up with his dad, and he's suffering from mental illness, and he lives in the streets, he lives in cars. His father tries to help him. He shows signs of improvement, and then he goes back into the streets. It's very difficult, right? It's very difficult. A lot of times they stay up at night, they lose sleep because they want to help their child or their sibling or their family member. And it's extremely difficult, but, oftentimes when this sort of criminality or this sort of level of, they had supposedly this top 50 list of people who needed help in the subway. I don't know where that came from, or homeless people that needed treatment. And supposedly he was within the top 50 of these people. There was a lot of people who obviously, dropped the ball on this one,
Yeah, who do you blame? Who do you think dropped the ball, at least on the mental illness part?
Well, I would say it's a shared responsibility between the city. Like I said, again, there's almost $1 billion that de Blasio had slotted for Thrive New York City, which was supposed to help people in this sort of predicament that are gone, that the AG or the IG or anyone, no one doesn't bother to investigate for some reason. There's no, special investigation into this. This has been over 2 years now that this money's been gone. That puts some of the culpability on the city, right? And then, unfortunately, and again, you don't want to sort of kick these people when they're down, but it's also some of the blame has to be shared by the family, and some of the blame, of course, has to be shared by the criminal justice system. If he's in Rikers Island and he's identified as someone who needs mental help or mental health, program while he's incarcerated or while he's waiting trial or whatever the case may be, the city, should have the obligation to get him treated. So I think there's enough blame to go around.
We're waiting, obviously, on autopsy results, also toxicology. What do you think we could learn when we get those details coming from the autopsy and toxicology of Jordan Neely?
Well, I think that it's, as we saw in the George Floyd case, right, there were mitigating circumstances, right? He was high on, he was on fentanyl. Neely's own relative, I believe it was his uncle, that said he was using drugs and had him, sort of in a manic state. So I think that, while the autopsy showed that he died of, asphyxiation or compression or chokehold, I'm sure that, and I'm not a toxicologist, forensic pathologist or anything like that, but I certainly think that, if he had drugs in his system, it would definitely contribute to his death. Whether his heart gave out, during the chokehold or whatever happened, I'm sure they're going to find something in his system. Unfortunately, again, I don't want to disparage him. He's gone, but the facts are the facts, right? And we'll see when they come out.
You talked about drugs or things that could potentially, and again, of course, we don't know, but if it turns out, as you mentioned, I think there was a relative who said something about K2, the synthetic drug K2, that he had at one time used it and may have still been using it. What are your thoughts? Because that is sort of a synthetic that causes people basically to have hallucinations, and also is often paired with, I was talking to a doctor actually recently who was talking about on air on one of my shows, saying that often there's marijuana laced with K2. What do you know about K2? And also, a lot of folks with mental illness, that's a dangerous combination to have somebody who has mental illness, a schizophrenia, and then you throw in a combination of a hallucinogenic drug potentially. That's a very dangerous combination.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. Goldbelly ships Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garden's famous cakes. So, if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT. That's goldbelly.com, promo code GIFT.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at ollie.com. Ollie! These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's going to definitely exacerbate the situation, right? I mean, having that mental illness and then having this, hallucinogenic, and then you're now, getting violent because of it, right? You're paranoid. You're it has a lot of, side effects. So, it's going to contribute and exacerbate the situation. And then with that comes the violence, right? The paranoid schizophrenia, things of that nature. So, it's going to contribute to all the symptoms, or worsen all the symptoms that come with the mental illness. And then, it speaks to the fact that he was allegedly, and again, there's a lot of things that are out there that I'm sure, which was the reason why he wasn't charged in the first place. Penny wasn't charged in the first place because they were waiting for other videos. They were waiting for witness statements. They're waiting. And then, of course, they bowed to the pressure of the mob, and they ended up, charging him instead of waiting to see if there would be an indictment as was originally planned. So there's a lot of, allegations that he was violent and aggressive, and, being on that synthetic definitely, lends itself to that, point of view, or that, those allegations.
You sort of said the rush to the mob, if you will. You think about Alvin Bragg. Originally, there were reports that the DA was going to send it to a grand jury, Angel, and then he decided not to. Ultimately, it will go there, but he decided to sort of circumvent it, if you will, or preempt it. and decided to go ahead with charges. And some people surmise that if he had sent it to a grand jury, that is a jury of your peers. And maybe many of those people, as most New Yorkers have been at some point, have been on a New York City subway, or they've seen the headlines of what happens on a New York City subway. They've seen it, they've lived it, and can sort of put themselves in there. And that may not have worked the way maybe Alvin Bragg wanted to. What are your thoughts about how he did sort of circumvent the grand jury and decided to take it upon himself?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, yeah, to your point, right? I mean, how many times have we witnessed crimes on the subways? Women getting accosted or assaulted. We spoke about it on your show several months ago. The one woman who, I believe she was a TSA employee, and she was almost beaten to death. There was another woman who had feces smashed in her face by someone who was making sexual advances towards her. And, oftentimes we see people standing around and taking videos with their cell phones, and we always say, hey, why isn't this person doing anything? Why aren't they acting? And Penny did something. He acted. And of course, Bragg, because listen, I mean, he has the reputation of not following the rule of law. He's more concerned about being a criminal defender than a criminal prosecutor. So, it's unfortunate that he chose this. But now, I mean, if this goes to trial, there's no way that Penny's going to get a fair trial in New York. He's going to have to, or in New York County anyway, he's going to have to ask for a change of venue because there's no way that he's going to get a fair trial at this point.
What do you say to some people who said race had something to do with it? Of course, Daniel Penny's attorney said, no, it had nothing to do with it. But what is your thought? Is that why you believe that it could rule against him, if you will, in a New York jury?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, again, with the George Floyd incident, right, we can go back to that one. And I'm certainly not going to advocate for Derek Chauvin, but,
Which, by the way, was horrible. I mean, what he did was horrible. You could see it on the video.
Absolutely.
The Derek Chauvin was horrible.
Right. But the thing is, right, it was right away it was deemed racist. And there was nothing to indicate it was racism other than George Floyd was black and Chauvin was white. As in this case, Neely is black and Penny is white. There's no indication that it was driven by racism. I never heard anyone allege that he called him any, racial slur or any derogatory term associated with racism. So, but unfortunately, because, the people, the mob, so to speak, is calling it a public lynching and, being black in America and police choke us out. And now, white people choke us out. There's no way that a grand jury or a jury of his peers, especially in New York at this point, are going to give him a fair trial, in my opinion.
Do you think this will make it to trial, or do you think when it gets to the grand jury that maybe some of those jurors, as I mentioned, may have been on a subway or know what it's like to be on the New York City subway, which is very scary, and that it will just get thrown out, and then Alvin Bragg can say, hey, well, I did my job, I charged him, and the grand jury threw it out, or maybe then he sends it to another grand jury in the future and tries again, who knows?
Right. Yeah. I think that, anything's possible, right? It could be, to your point, that these people have ridden the subways and they've been a victim of, being accosted by someone like this themselves. And they could certainly say, hey, we understand why he took action. But then on the other hand, because it's after the fact, so much after the fact, and so much this has been played out in the media. Again, the race card has been thrown around. I just don't think that, he's going to get a fair shake. I mean, we remember the homeless man who was executed in St. Louis, right? And it was caught on video. He was a young Hispanic man, or, he was in his 40s rather, and he was executed by a young black man who walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. There was no cries of racism in that case. There was no outrage about how, this Hispanic man was killed by this, violent young black man, because it didn't fit the narrative that's always being pushed in this country. And it's really, really sad that it always has to come back down to skin color and racism. it's sickening, to be quite honest with you.
Well, and also I think about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, she came out and said, in this case, in the subway case, it's an execution, it's murder. And I kept thinking, and obviously, listen, I think everybody's heart should break for Jordan Neely. It is. It's sad. The whole situation is sad. He's had a really, obviously, tough life. His mother was killed. I mean, there's so many, there's so many problems with the system, as you talked about, Angel. And yet, where was she during, the 27 other, in the last few years, killings on the subway? Where was she? Nowhere.
Right. Well, she made it quite apparent that, she just grandstands and likes to go, preach from her pulpit, so to speak, and pretend that she cares when it behooves her, right? But when it's, when the other cases, as you mentioned, happen, she's nowhere to be found because there's no opportunities for her to push this divisive narrative that she loves to push. So, I mean, it's really sad. We keep electing, these people keep electing these officials into office. They keep voting for them. And, I say it all the time. It's like, as a dog returns to their vomit, so a fool repeats their folly. They continue to see these people. They really don't have their best interests at heart. And yet they're bamboozled into believing they're going to help them somehow. And they continue to vote for these people who do not care. And they make it apparent that they do not care.
How do we clean up the New York City subways so people can feel safe? Because they clearly do not, and they clearly are dangerous. I mean, transit crimes are up big time.
Well, the police abolitionist New York City Council, the vast majority of them, do not like the police. They want to defund the police. They want to abolish the police. They want to get rid of subway fares. They want people to ride for free. And nothing in this life is free, right? Somebody has to pay for it, whether it be the taxpayers, the rich, whatever it is, right? We need more police on the subway. And these councils, the New York City Council complains about overtime, complains about the PD overtime, complains about, how the police were given a raise. The PBA just, ratified a contract with the city. They complain. But the only way to stop violence, right, is by putting police officers and having that feel of omnipresence where you have these people, these men and women who are willing to put their lives on the line in spite of all the hatred and vitriol, targeted against them throughout this country since 2014, to be honest with you. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. The only way to stop crime and the only way to protect the public is to have more police. 1,000%,
and appreciate them. And I'm sure everybody in hindsight obviously wish there had been a police officer on that subway train. Think about how different, Angel, it might have been had there been an officer on that train that day.
That's right. Absolutely. Listen, again, the cops are the thin blue line between chaos, anarchy, and order. Right. And if there was an officer on that train, rest assured, he or she would have taken action, and it likely would have been a completely different story. And unfortunately, Mr. Neely, had to die. And now everybody wants the Monday morning quarterback, every aspect of this.
Well, we will be watching this case closely. You're right. It's just a sad situation all the way around. Everybody needs to feel safe, and those with mental illness, the city and the state and the country need to do more. There's so many layers to this, and we also absolutely need to support our police officers and those who are protecting us every single day. Angel, you do so much to support our great men and women in blue. Everybody, be sure to subscribe and share to this podcast. And Angel Maysonet, thank you for everything you have done. Your great service in protecting New York City when you were there at the NYPD, and all that you do to continue to support our great heroes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. It's my honor.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.